otherwise known as 4 and BX257, your friendly neighborhood 1980s G.I. Joe reviewer, and today I'm going to be doing a bit of spring cleaning. In other words, these are my tips for maintaining, storage, and displaying your vintage G.I. Joe toys. But I'm sure this will be applicable to many other vintage and modern toys as well. I know a lot of people ask me whether I have a big man cave setup with all of my G.I. Joes all together, but the truth of the matter is that I kind of don't. This is my typical setup. Just a small, maybe like 2 shelves, and this one glass Dettol shelf. And that's really it. Now there's nothing wrong with some big man cave. It's just a lot more maintenance. But for me, I swap things out every like month or 2 months. So that's the time when I take things out to get them either stored or cleaned or both. Of course, I think my tips will actually benefit you whether you have a small display like this or whether you have a near permanent man cave setup. Now typically if you want to clean your shelves, you're going to have to take everything out, then clean the shelf itself, then clean each individual item, and then put it back. But that's the hard way of doing things. Typically what I do is I dust the things while they're right in the shelves just as they are. Of course, you can't use a big fat duster like this because, well, I'm sure that typically most people have very crowded shelves like this and they want their most dynamic display that they can, and that means crowding your stuff up. You put this something like a big duster like this in and you're just going to knock everything over. So what I do is I have 2 types of brushes. A very small paintbrush, typically just for the vehicles, and a small kit paintbrush, typically for the figures. And after just dusting them where they are, then I'll use an air blaster, just for the surrounding shelves. Now there's advantages and disadvantages to this type of canned air blaster, and I typically don't actually use this on my displays, but I do use it just, occasionally for just my reviews, just when I want something done really fast. But this thing also has kind of chemicals in it, which might be fine for the actual figures and stuff like that, but it's really not very good to breathe in. So when I'm doing my regular maintenance, when I'm all sort of up into this sort of thing, what I use to put my old nose at ease is an air compressor. Now this also has some disadvantages as well. Now obviously, as it's being compressed air, you're not breathing in anything harmful. But because it's compressing air, it's also compressing some of that air into water. So if you're going to use this as your blaster, which I do kind of recommend, but if you are going to use it, just remember to blast your initial sprays into a safe area or onto your hand, just to make sure that the water isn't coming out. In that way, you don't really want to be spraying your G.I. Joes with water and just leaving them like that, or spraying your background. If you have a custom background, you don't want to be spraying that with water either, accidentally. Now I know an air compressor might sound like a very hefty chunk of change, but just to clean your G.I. Joes. But to be perfectly honest, this does have a lot of great uses around the house. Trust me, it's a wise investment. Okay, so I just blasted this whole area with air, and you're probably thinking to yourself, why are the Joes still standing? Surely, even with stands, they can still be toppled over with a gust of air. And that's true. But that's because of my secret weapon. And as you can see, on the bottom of the stands, and sometimes on the feet or skis or whatever that I want, I put poster putty or blue tack. It comes in a variety of different names, but this is typically what I use. Of course, it's not blue. The blue tack is generally for the wall, for posters, really, just so that you can see it. But I use the white version. There's no danger of the color leaking onto the figures if you put it on the figures, I don't think. I've been using this for years, and both the blue and white version, they don't typically leave any marks or anything like that on the figures. This just keeps everything in place. While I don't have an in-flight display at the moment, when I want to hang up vehicles and jets like this, what I typically do is this. Now this is like a figure display, but it's still the same principle. I just use some fishing line wire, and instead of making a single wire hooked up to a specific spot, what I make is one big loop, or sometimes 2 or 3. But usually it's a loop, and this loop I can attach to either a curtain bar, or a hook on the ceiling, or even a nail on the wall. And one of the advantages of having the loop versus like one long strand, which might not particularly be safe, it could still come out of that one thing. This usually rests around an entire wing or a fuselage or something like that, and you can still sort of slide it around, giving it a more dynamic angle that you might not have thought of before, but you can still sort of maneuver it around. The other advantage to that is you can actually just take the vehicle out and put another one in without having to rearrange or make a whole new bunch of fishing line wires hooked up to your wall or ceiling. One other thing is, when I make a knot, I also put a tiny dab of crazy glue in there, just to make sure it's really secure. Sorry for the bad edit, but I felt that this was important enough to show you a proper example, so I set up my old display using my Night Raven here. And I just have a hanging basket bracket to hang my stuff off of. And as you can see, I have it level here, but I can turn it in for a nice dynamic look. Turn it the other way for another look, maybe to show off the weapons, and even move it downwards. To give it more of a dive bombing look. And now for a science lesson. Now, I totally understand if you want to skip ahead straight to the storage tips, but I felt that I should probably preface that with exactly why old vintage G.I. Joe toys discolor and become brittle. Now, I haven't really gone in depth anytime else, but I felt that I should here in order for you to fully understand exactly why I'm doing things the way I am. A lot of people ask why plastic yellows, but I'll start with explaining how. Plastic turns yellow because of 2 factors. Plastic is always aging, and because a flame retardant chemical called bromine is added to it. By aging, I mean that all plastic deteriorates, slowly and microscopically in some instances, and rapidly and catastrophically in others. 50-year-old plastic can look brand new, whereas month-old plastic can start falling apart in your hands. The rate of deterioration is dependent on outside factors acting on the plastic. The flame retardant chemical bromine is mandated by safety laws to be added to plastic, especially toys. It is brown in concentrated form, but can be unstable and turns into a dark yellow gaseous form which spreads in all directions to the surface, whether it's in the exact direction of the initial plastic deterioration starter or not. The why is also 2 problems. The outside factors that act on plastic to speed up its aging process, which are UV radiation, heat, moisture, oxygen, and chemicals, and the quality of bromine added to the plastic, which is lesser the lighter the color of plastic it's being added to. UV radiation from sunlight and fluorescent light bulbs is the culprit for yellowing most plastic objects. I say most, but for plastic toys, it's usually the combination of heat, moisture, and oxygen. While toys are played with outside, weren't the 70s and 80s peaceful, and exposed to damaging sunlight, UV radiation also bleaches their paintwork. When you see a yellow toy with perfect paint, it's clear something else happened. When you keep toys in a dark closet, toy box,
attic, or basement and it still yellows? Did UV rays really turn it yellow? No. Everybody easily understands that UV rays are harmful because we see the results on our own skin. But toys don't tan. Well, only on purpose anyway. This is why I started with the why plastic yellows, to emphasize the complex chemical reactions going on inside plastic. Here's the main culprit for toys: exposure to heat, moisture, and oxygen. Heat, moisture, and oxygen can occur in one event altogether: a humid day with little air circulation. All things which happen in a dark closet, toy box, attic, and basement. That's all it takes. A single day of this to start the downhill slide into Yellowsville. Chemicals like chlorine from a pool, oils from hands, and the chemicals on hands, like harsh soaps and cream, play a small role as well in aging plastic when frequently exposed. Obviously, when a bad combination of all the aforementioned factors occur, it's bad news for the toy. The quality of bromine is no slight to the toy industry. The amount of flame retardant is mandated and will have the same safety effects. But you know you can't add a dark brown chemical to clear, white, or light color plastics without it affecting the color somehow. That's why a lesser quality is added to plastics of those colors, so it doesn't add a yellow-brown tinge from the get-go. But lesser quality in the case of bromine means that it's that much more unstable and turns into its yellow gas form that much faster. Dark plastics and plastics with deep saturated colors can age and yellow just as fast even with stable, high-quality bromine. But light color plastics are just particularly vulnerable. How do I combat this? For my displays, I have my shelves turned away from the windows, open and exposed in an area of the room that has good airflow. Having your toys in a dark, cool place is clearly beneficial, and so is good airflow. Stuffy, closed-off areas are just perfect for humidity to linger and affect plastic. More importantly, how do I store my toys when putting them in boxes helps deter UV rays, but is an equal risk for exposure to stale, damaging oxygen and humidity? I keep my stored toys in boxes that are not entirely sealed airtight. They're also stored in an area that's ventilated and cool. Air conditioning would be ideal, but that's expensive. My secret weapon in all this is silica gel. This is a substance which absorbs excess moisture. It comes in various quantities from little packets to large jugs. It's quite cheap and has many uses besides the one mentioned here. Typically, I use pre-made packages as handling the natural or synthetic crystals directly is not recommended. The larger the box, the more silica gel packets I add to cover the larger areas potentially exposed to moisture. Now here I have a couple of different examples of storing figures. You don't necessarily have to have these old vintage cases, but this is just what I happen to use because I collect the cases as well, and I might as well just use them for that purpose. But I'll get to that in a moment. But as you can see, I just have the individual figures just out loose, just like that. Normally, for actually most of them, I usually have the accessories in their own plastic little bag, little Ziploc bag, but I still have the figures relatively loose. But the most important thing to put in here are these little silica gel packets. Now, these silica gel packets you get from electronics, footwear, sometimes clothing and stuff like that. Silica gel crystals are something that you can buy at a florist or something like that. Even though they usually sell this type of thing in bulk, it's nice to actually put it into a small little sachet like this. As a matter of fact, I used to, for larger things like a big Rubbermaid bin for my vehicles, I used to actually pour a whole ball's worth of silica gel crystals into an old sock and just leave that as the sachet. But for things like this, you can just use these. And these are actually reusable. But you do have to be careful with that, and I'll get to that after I finish this little storage thing. But actually, you can see that this actually has, this particular one actually had 2 levels of trays. So I usually put around 2 or 3 in an area. might only be one in the bottom there, but I should probably put 2 or 3 in the bottom as well. But you can see that I actually put this particular silicone gel packet underneath Iceberg here, who is an all-white figure. And he's one of the figures that are really succumb to yellowing. So that's why I put that one under him in specifically. But the silica gel packet actually helps the whole group all around here. Here in my jumbo case, this is kind of really the normal way that I actually have this set up. With a big bag here, and even though the bag is, well, it's a Ziploc bag, but I never really close it because the figures, like I said, are just kind of loose. The plastic does help preserve the paint job so they're not kind of rubbing against each other. But as you can see, I keep the accessories just in their own little plastic bag because they're usually the culprit of rubbing up against the figures and scratching the paint job, especially when they're all kind of jumbled up like this. This one doesn't have any compartmentalized little areas for the individual figures. But because I don't move this particular jumbo case around a lot, the figures don't move around a lot. So it's kind of okay for it to be like this. And again, you can either have the silica gel packets like either in the thing here like that, or just directly into the bag like this. However, like I said, if you don't have a vintage case like this, or kind of a newish case that kind of resembles this, most of the time people use a case like this. It's almost like a Tupperware type of a case here. But like I said before, you really do need some airflow into these types of containers. So food grade Tupperware containers are actually not very good because they're actually meant to seal solidly. So this type of generic case is actually quite a bit better. It's not meant for food, so even when you lock it down and all that, it's not really sealing this thing shut and sealing the gases and the air just right in there. You don't want that at all. I would actually hesitate against, like boring holes or anything extreme like that. It doesn't need like super airflow. Like even though this is quite tight when it's actually all well and done, it's still not airtight, and that's what you want.
In order to reuse silica gel packets, you have to warm them up in order to get rid of the excess moisture that they've gathered over the year. Now, as you can see, mine have little check marks on them which indicate how many times I've actually recycled these ones. So typically, once they hit 3, I usually throw them out after that. They might actually last quite a bit longer than that, but I'm not really going to take a chance on that. Anyway, what you typically want to do is you don't want to toast it or bake it, you just want to have it warmed. So it's just warmed a little bit just to get rid of that tiny little bit of moisture, just so that it can be reused. Now, if you don't have a toaster which has light settings like that, you can actually just put it on top of the toaster like that when you're doing your toast or whatever it is you're doing, just so that it gets that tiny bit of warmth in order to drain the excess moisture.
Now this is your typical Rubbermaid bin. And this is generally where I store my vehicles in. But as you can see, you can also put figures in there as well, as long as there's space. Here I've actually put my Sergeant Slaughter figure in the bin instead of with the other figures because I like to keep him with all of his paperwork, which of course doesn't fit in with the compartmentalized area that I have in my 86 figure area. But as you can see, this is generally how I keep the vehicles. The main body of the vehicle is just kind of loose and open like this. Again, mostly for airflow. But I've taken off as many parts as I can and keep them in a bag. The driver figure is in there as well. These plastic bags full of the parts
actually act as kind of a barrier between all the other vehicles. So you'll have well, generally I have a loose vehicle underneath the bag and a loose vehicle underneath that. Just like the figures, I generally keep some silica gel packets in here as well. I have quite a lot of them, in fact. Well, that's all the time I have right now. Please check out my Facebook page for more information and behind the scenes photos for these reviews. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for next time to see another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review. See you then.